Great. So, look, what an honor to stand in front of such a group. At JCRC, we are so privileged to be here with our partners UJA, with partners from the Jewish community, from the wider New York community. I want to just express the appreciation we all feel to those who have put this together. Karen Kastner, who dreamed a dream, Bob Kaplan, Emily Bogdan, and the entire team of the Shared Society group of department of center of JCRC. We're joined here by the president of JCRC, Ben Golub. I'm glad that Ben is here, and many staff as well. You know, I, like Michael Dowling, I'm an immigrant from the same country as Michael, as you may tell from my accent. I grew up in Ireland, and guns were not part of the society I grew up in. Growing up as a child, I never saw a gun. There was issues of wider terrorism, etc., far away, but the idea of guns on the streets was something that was completely alien to me. And as I've moved here, have children here, brought up children here, it is an issue which clearly resonates, and as we hear from our speakers, who frame the issues in ways both factual, detailed, emotional, personal, one of the defining issues for what happens in this city and in this country. So I thank you. I am honored to be with you, and we at JCRC, we're inspired by all what you do and what you strive to do, and we look forward to working with you, being partners with you in the journey ahead. Thank you.
Assemblymember Chandler Waterman, would you like to give us a few words? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Great afternoon.
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I know I didn't get sleep because we just had to pass a budget last night, but we did it. We got here, right? So I want to thank JCRC for being such a trusted partner, for all the support way beyond I was elected in the community. Thank you to Rabbi Kaplan. Thank you to Gideon. I saw him, my partners, for Israel, right, that took care of me as we did our trip recently. Noam, Rabbi Miller. Thank y'all all so much for the support for the electeds in the community, and just being a trusted partner and constantly supporting us in this effort, especially as we talk about gun violence and mental health. And thank you to all the amazing panelists. Let's give it up to the whole team here and everyone who organizes, because there's always people in the front, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes, right? Emily and others who supported this, all right? So one of the biggest things when you come up here, you don't want to forget to thank anybody. But just, if please, my pastor, Galbraith, will say, charge it to my mind and not to my heart. All right? So I just want to just state, I am from Brooklyn. I'm Assembly member Monique Chandler Waterman. You heard, newly elected, first Black woman, Caribbean woman to hold a seat in Brooklyn, replacing our U.S. ambassador to Jamaica, Nick Perry. He's been appointed in that position. He's now in Jamaica. So that covers East Flatbush mainly, but it's parts of Canarsie, a little bit of Brownsville, a little bit of Crown Heights. So for over, I would say, 20 years, I've been advocating to reduce gun violence and to destigmatize and decriminalize mental health. How does that translate as an advocate and now being a legislator? So I'm going to take it back a little bit. I have 4 amazing children. I have a 21-year-old, a 20, 17, and now 15-year-old. And you may have met my husband of 22 years, Eric Waterman, right over there. And when I had my first child, everything looks different. The world looked different to me. The garbage issues were like the streets didn't look clean. There was so much things happening in the community. And I said, what have I done? And it was 9/11 when I had my child. So I was like, where did I bring my child into this world? So I was like, you know what? We have a responsibility when we bring kids into this world to make sure we make it better. So I can focus on my household, or holistically, do I take care of the whole community? Because my kids still have to leave the house, right, to go outside. So I said, I don't have to move to another community to make it better. I'm going to stay right here in my community and make sure that it's better. So in that effort, we started a 24-hour child care facility because I didn't like the quality of child care. And I was working midnight shifts. My husband and I work Sunday to Tuesday. He'll work Wednesday to Saturday. We barely saw each other. We work 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. There had to be more people like us, right? And we wanted arts and we wanted music. We wanted different things for the kids. We wanted to make sure they had all of that and be able to read by the time they got to pre-K in the public school. So we started there. Then we realized with the domestic violence situation, the different things going on, gun violence, that we need to start a nonprofit because idle hands the devil workshop. So we started East Rockbridge Village Inc. at the time. And it was just providing wraparound services. My mom worked 3 to 4 jobs. My grandparents had to take care of me. My father was not in the home. My mother public assistance had to support us, the pantries, our clergy. It took a whole village to make sure I am here today. So I wanted to pour back into that village. It started with having a child, like, wow, we need to do something about it. And then, how did I get here? My teacher took me to church, right? My pastor brought me clothes the first day of school. So then how do we embody that concept? And then that's how the organization got formed. And as a legislator, well, as an advocate and now a legislator, I'm like, God put me through all these things, hardships, trials, tests, to now testimonies. How do I now bring that over to legislative capacity? Through policy, through funding. So we started, when I got into office in May, it's not a year yet, what I did is create a task force. I needed people with lived experience from the community, from my district. We have a mental health task force. That's someone who's been living with mental health challenges. Those who's been impacted with trauma, they're on the task force. We have public safety task force. Kings Against Violence Initiative, CAVI, they're part of that. God Squad is a part of that. East Rockbridge Village Inc. is a part of that. We have CCRB. We have those who were impacted by gun violence, those who were part of gangs or trying to get out of gangs, whatever. We have all of that together because I know one perspective, but you need to have the ear of the ground. My job is to represent the entire district. Not just to go, when I go to upstate, when I go to Albany, I have to still have Brooklyn in my district in mind. So that is what lead the priorities of our office. So we work with task force from mental health to public safety to education. I have a faith leaders task force, and I also have small business and nonprofits and quality of life. And what I do is when I'm thinking about legislation, we're thinking about funding, we go to those task forces and say, hey, here's some legislation we're thinking about. Rabbi was at the mass shooting press conference we had, where 4 or more we're saying through legislation, that's considered a mass shooting. Unfortunately, in a more affluent neighborhood, automatically it's called a mass shooting. In the black and brown community, it's called multiple, it's called triple, it's massive. When anybody gets shot, we don't want anybody to get shot. But what I learned is mass shootings, when it's labeled that, it comes with resources. So we want to make sure no matter what color, what background you are, that if some 4 more got shot, we get the same resources in any community. So that's part of what my mission and vision is to make sure not only am I representing 130 plus thousand people, am I really bringing the voices from the district when I get to Albany? Yes, we're helping New York State as a whole, but how do we make sure holistically we are not only just representing the state, we are also representing those 130,000 people that elected to be in office. It is people over politics, it's people over the power. I'm here, and I always say, sorry to get a little religious, right, on you, is this seat right here that I'm in is God's seat. That's how I see it. And I'm here in the physical form to do the work that I need to do. So it's not about me. I'm a child of God. And it's more about that I have a responsibility to the people in the community. So we just passed a budget, a big budget, $229 billion budget, and it was late. But it was important for it to be a right budget and not just an untimed budget. And I can't tell you one thing in Brooklyn and then go to Albany and then say something different. So we had some of the things that we were going back and forth with the governor was on bail reform. There's a lot of hype and a lot of fear mongering when it comes to certain words, when it comes to public safety. Crime did not go up because of bail reform. So we had to make sure that message got out. And that was some of the things that was we had to fight to make sure we didn't get a holistic overhaul of bail reform. So those are some of the things in housing. Some of those things was at the table. It's very complex, but I do my best on a monthly basis to explain through my Vital Voice meeting, what do I do as an elected official? How do you hold me accountable? And it's important that we know that civic engagement. We had a redistricting process that I heard someone mention every 10 years. You know, there's a census, there's more people, less people. We have to figure that all out. All of Canarsie was cut out of our district. Jefferson Gorman, Brownsville was cut out of our district. We made sure the community members understood what that meant. When you build common interest and you build all the civic engagement, and when you campaign, people, it's like, I don't trust elected officials, and you convince them to trust in the system again and to vote and do all that, and then you do all these wonderful things and all these resources, and then now they say, sorry, new elected, start the process again. That people lose hope. So I'm proud to say today, because of all the civic engagement, the meetings we had, they came to hear us, over 70 people in the district. We have 99.7% of the district back. We wanted 100%, but we got that. So the power is in the people, and if you don't know how to advocate, then you don't know what to do when it comes to reducing gun violence. And I will close, because I know I have limited time. With the Public Safety Task Force, what we do is that same engagement. We have something for our 4 pillars. It's prevention, intervention, restoration, and legislation. So those same former gang members or those who's after trying to get out, they are making legislation. They realize the power is in them organizing, choosing the right person that has their interest in mind, and then what do you do to bring resources to their district? I'm proud to say that a lot of them are leading those same meetings we have at the Vital Voice. A lot of them is out there making sure right people get in office. A lot of them is out there advocating. So to me, telling somebody to put down the gun is not enough, because they need to have resources. They need housing, affordable housing. They need wraparound services. They need the food. They need proper education. The trigger is pulled before the trigger is pulled. We can't wait till the trigger is pulled on the streets, but then we have oppressed them in so many ways. When your back is against the wall, think about it from a mama or a papa perspective, and you don't got a place for your child to live. You don't have food. You don't have that. You're going to do it by any means necessary. So we cannot, in government or anybody, we cannot say we're not part of the problem. The trigger is pulled when that 1-year-old mom has to work 4 jobs because she can't afford that rent. That's when the trigger is pulled. We see it 18 years later and figure out what happened. We contributed to that. So how can I do my part and we do our part? This is not an I thing. This is a we thing. And we got to all do this together. So when you talk about mental health and the trauma, we have to destigmatize and decriminalize by having constant conversation. 988 is a number that we advocated for way before I was elected. That with a public advocate, Jamani Williams, at the time, where you would call a number with a non-police response and get a mental health professional. We got to talk about this as people get overwhelmed, to our kids and beyond. We got to continue talking about mental health as an everyday topic, and that is how you destigmatize and make it more comfortable in spaces, because we're all 1 or 2 situations, God forbid, away from a mental health breakdown. And if left untreated, it becomes a condition. And we live in trauma every day, unfortunately, and the trauma, the mental health, the public safety, gun violence, all that go hand in hand. But we need resource. We need to over-resource an area, and that's how we reduce these issues we have in our community. So thank you all for your part that you play in this. So thank you for your time. I probably went over. I'm sorry, Rabbi, but I really appreciate it.
No, you preach, girl. You preach. Amen.
folks. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. There are a few extra lunches left, and if you can see Rachel Lissy, Rachel is over there in the corner. Afterwards, if you have a group you can bring them back to, or other people want to bring them back to other places, please feel free to see Rachel and take them with you. We never like to see food discarded. We like to see it winding up people's bellies, because we're living in a very precarious world. We're going to go into our next panel and on our journey. And then after that, we're going to break down into small groups. There's a number of small groups that should be on your agenda. Again, use the QR codes. One of the small groups is going to be what the next steps look like. So those who want to help plan out those next steps, please feel free to be part of that. And the next panel is going to be looking at gun violence and public safety. Because everyone talked about the need for us all to be safe, and everyone deserves, as a title, everyone deserves to be safe. So the folks that I'm going to ask to come up and be part of the panel, the person that's going to be moderating the panel is Rabbi Hilly Haber. Rabbi Haber is from Central Synagogue. I'm only going to talk about the moderator right now. Again, look up the rest of the bios. Rabbi Haber is from Central Synagogue and is also the co-chair of the New York Jewish Coalition on Criminal Justice Reform. Most of all, a dear, dear friend and teacher. We're going to ask Kellen Khalifu to come up with the Center for Justice Innovation, a violence interrupter, Neighbors in Action. We're going to ask for Tatiana Amlin to come up from the New York DA's office. We're going to ask for Dr. Sanjali Rajan from Columbia Surge, Drew Skinner from the DOJ, Department of Justice, and Akila Sherels from the Community-Based Public Safety Collective. Again, look up all their various bios online, but I would just listen to what they have to tell you, because who they really are, I'm sure will come out very powerfully during this next panel. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for being here. And I'm so grateful to our panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. Waiting for one more person. I think we'll get started. So I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, a word of introduction, but also to share from your perspective, from your work, kind of from where your personal experience and from where you sit professionally. If you could just help us define gun violence. What does it look like? I know we've been talking a lot about it today, but I think each of you has a unique perspective. Help us build kind of a collective definition for gun violence that we can use throughout this conversation. So, can we get started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tatiana Amlin. I am with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, where I work in the Pathways to Public Safety Division. I started my career as a trial division assistant, prosecuting gun violence, gang violence, narcotics, domestic violence throughout the city. And about halfway through my career, I learned about a lot of the things you heard in the earlier panel, particularly adverse childhood experiences, and that was a real light bulb moment for me in my career. And I pivoted into working in alternatives to incarceration. And what we do there is we look for programming-based dispositions to work with young people and older people to hopefully stop the cycle and the reasons that they are committing crimes. And in particular, around gun violence, what I really see in interviewing a lot of these young men and women and victims of violence throughout the city is a crisis of belonging and a real need to show people that they are a part of our community, to connect them with organizations where they can feel like someone important and that they have a future that is not just hanging around not so social, pro-social places and people that may lead to criminal justice involvement.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon. It's not good morning. I was just chaperoning a field trip this morning, so I'm still in mom mode. So I'm Sonali Rajan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health and Behavior Studies at Teachers College at Columbia University. I also have an appointment in the Department of Epidemiology at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health. And I'm currently the president of the newly launched Research Society for the Prevention of Firearm-Related Harms. And I share that mostly to say that I think about gun violence very much from the perspective of what is the science telling us about what evidence-based and effective solutions can and should look like. My primary areas of research really are focused on, of course, gun violence, but more specifically, school safety, adverse childhood experiences, as you were just saying, and really the impact of gun violence on children, both direct and indirect forms of gun violence. And that really shapes how I think about this issue, which is that while it's important that we are quantifying the number of people who are shot and killed every year with firearms, of course, that is a big part of the gun violence epidemic in this country. It's also important that we are understanding and then preventing and also responding to in the aftermath the other types of exposure that kids are, in particular in their communities, are experiencing both in schools and out of school. I could talk forever, so I'll stop. But that's generally where my work sits, and I'm just so happy to be here today. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Skinner. I'm a federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. We cover Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, and other counties north of there. I'm the co-chief of the Violent and Organized Crime Unit in our office. And so that means that I have supervised about 20 federal prosecutors, and we investigate and prosecute murders, gang cases, firearms cases, sex trafficking cases are in my unit. You asked what's gun violence. It's certainly not all of it, what I'm about to say. I'll just give you the piece that I see most in my day-to-day work. The gun violence that we see the most in our office is retaliatory gang violence. It's crews of increasingly these days younger and younger, usually men, who are doing shootings over perceived slights in the neighborhood. Sometimes it's related to drug trafficking. Too often it's related to something that might seem silly to the rest of us or in hindsight, but people think that the right way to solve those problems is through shootings, and then it escalates from there, and that those shootings can go on for months and months and years. And no question, it has a disproportionate impact in underserved neighborhoods. That's the places where I'm seeing this violence the most, where both the victims and the people doing the shootings are.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Akila Sherrills. I'm the board chair of the Newark Community Street Team and the executive director of the Community-Based Public Safety Collective. The Newark Community Street Team, NCST, is one of the nation's premier community-based public safety initiatives or community violence and intervention initiatives out of Newark, New Jersey. Launched about in 2014 by our visionary leader in the city, Mayor Ras Baraka. We've now had 7 consecutive years in a row of decreases of homicide and overall violence. Newark, many of you know, was on the top 10 most violent city list for almost 50 consecutive years. And we have figured something out. And, with a lot of prayer and a lot of support, we've been able to move the needle pretty far down the field and support our community-based public safety, our community violence intervention agencies significantly. The collective, the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, is our national TTA provider, training and technical assistance provider. We've exported our strategy to multiple cities across the country so that CBI literally serves as a complementary strategy to policing in cities. I come from this work as a practitioner and as a former gang member. I grew up in the culture. I'm originally from Los Angeles. In 1992, myself and my brother and a group of friends organized a peace treaty between the Crips and Bloods in our neighborhood that changed the quality of life in our community. I co-founded a dozen nonprofits, but I would say one of the most significant ones in the 90s was Jim Brown's American Can program. before the advent of social media, we were in 15 cities across the country working on issues of gang violence, of community violence. And today, I feel like, after 30 years of doing this work on the front line and in the trenches, I'm a survivor as well. My oldest son was murdered 20 years ago, home from winter break. So this work is it's personal and professional for me, and excited to be here with all of you today.
I like that. That's sharing, man. Sharing. Greetings, everyone. How are you doing today? Great. My name is Kellen Kalefu. I'm a social worker. Specifically, I'm director of Neighbors in Action, which is a demonstration project of the Center for Justice Innovation. Really quickly, the Center for Justice Innovation, many of you might have known this as a former name, the Center for Court Innovation. It's a justice reform public safety agency that looks to create a more humane and effective justice system through research, demonstration projects like Neighbors in Action, or NEA for short, and technical and expert assistance, where we share our best practices, toolkits, domestically and internationally with different communities and jurisdictions who are looking to find creative and innovative solutions to public safety needs and concerns. Specifically at NEA, what we do, centralized in Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, we really look to combat a lot of the ills of our community through community development and not the reduction of the illness. There's a huge distinction between that I'm sure we'll be able to unpack a little bit later. But specifically what we do, young people are often at times the most vulnerable with all of these ills that society has, yet has less voice and are often not invited into spaces where decisions are made. So at NEA, we invest in our youth through youth development programs that helps them to achieve skills, but more importantly, put them in the space that they need to be as community leaders. Secondly, we do community-based alternatives to violence, right? Which is a lot about cure violence, crisis management work. Then we do a lot of things around healing and well-being, right? While we talk about gun violence, right? Before, during, and after gun violence, trauma happens. And how we deal with that trauma is going to be so important to see whether retaliation happens, but more importantly, growth. Because trauma stunts growth in many aspects. Lastly is about capacity building. As we do this work, we want to make sure that communities aren't dependent on us, that we are also providing the skills, the platforms, and amplifying the voices of communities so communities can do for self. That was a lot. To the question about how do we define gun violence, specifically with our crisis management program, Save Our Streets Brooklyn, which I want to shout out some of our alumni that we have here who helped founded that program back in 2010, New York City's first replication of the Cure Violence program. We look at it from a public health lens. So I look at gun violence as not the issue, but the symptom of a larger issue, which oftentimes goes into poverty, marginalization, racism, social and emotional needs, lack of investment, and also ownership.
Thanks, Kellen. Thank you, everyone. This is such an incredible panel, so I just want to say really thank you for your time, and I'm so excited to hear from each of you really based on your expertise and lived experience. The next question is really about the root causes of gun violence, and I think if we misidentify the root cause, we're going to come up with the wrong solutions. So from where you sit, and Kellen, you already started, so maybe you'll start us off because you're really getting into this. From your experience, what are the root causes of gun violence?
Many. So I do want to list a few that are a little bit closer to us in terms of things that we're trying to address. So poverty is a major aspect, right? When we look at gun violence, there are many reasons why people engage with guns, both for positive, not so positive reasons, depending on our reasoning. But there's economic factors that in communities, specifically Black and Brown communities, access to the main economic engines of this society are often cut. There's barriers, or there's so many hurdles to get over that you have to make a way out of no way. So poverty is a major aspect. With poverty also comes lack of ownership, and there's a distance that people experience when they live in communities where many times they're the ones who are stewarding the space, but when it comes to decision makings, they're usually not the people who decide whether a bike lane comes to a place, whether what type of parks happens, how funding for schools happen. A lot of laws against people congregating, right, in public spaces. Those things help to send a message to say that, you're not valued here. And in many ways, people react to that in many different fashions. Other spaces are people all seek an identity, right? And what we have available to us are pathways for us to carve out our identity, to see what we're skilled at, to see how we can contribute, to figure out ways how we can build ourselves up. Sometimes when guns are really available and there's a culture, right, of gun violence or whatever it may be, those things happen. I think last but not least, this country definitely has a gun culture that's unique to any other country in this planet, on this world. And I think part of that is being able to unpack that a little bit and figure out like how can we promote more opportunities for people to develop in the pathways that we want, and less emphasis on just reducing crime. Because there's one thing to, you can have no shootings in the city and people could still not be at peace, right? But when you invest in peace, right, what does that mean? That's people have adequate jobs that they can live. That means people have outlets recreationally, professionally, health-wise that they can live, learn, and grow. Communities that do that tend to be the safest communities. And those safe communities, whether there's strict gun laws or not, right? Because I do want to mention that. Safe communities are usually interconnected communities where people know each other, spaces where people have opportunities to build relationships and bonds with each other. And those are the things that help people to have outlets to mediate their conflicts before it has to go to law enforcement or any other entity. Also, it creates a opportunity for people to support each other. And when that happens, when people get a sense of like fulfillment from creating a sense of peace and building someone up, what that does transforms not only a person but a community.
Maybe we'll come down the line and Keila, anything you want to add on the root causes?
Yeah, I would just add that as the brother said, that safety is not just the absence of violence and crime. It's also the presence of well-being and the infrastructure to support victims and survivors in their respective healing journey. And so, as we know that poverty is one of the things that underscores gun violence, trauma, is one of the things that perpetuates, right? And in our community, whether it's vicarious trauma, hypervigilance, traumatic stress, these things have gone unaddressed, in a one-sided criminal legal system, that we've operated for 100 years, right? Our criminal legal system, when someone is harmed in community, we deploy law enforcement to apprehend the perpetrator, but we didn't deploy therapists and healers and counselors to address, the high levels of traumatic stress and hypervigilance, that underscore the violence that happens in the neighborhood, right? And one of the things that my brother said is that also racism plays a huge role, in who gets treated in terms of, services for gun violence, right? And so why we're in Newark, we're doing a study, we're just wrapping it down on illicit gun ownership, where we were asking folks like, why do you own guns in the neighborhood? And someone said it on the last panel, that clearance rates, for most police departments, for homicides are, at 18, 19%. And then for non-fatals, it's in the single digits. So who trusts the police department? You know what I'm saying? To address like kind of, horrific situations when they come up in the neighborhood? No one. So, and especially if you're Black, you get harmed, you go to the police department and say, hey, look, this has happened to me. They'll ask you where your gun at, and how are you defending yourself and your family? Like straight up, okay? This is racism, implicit bias, systemic racism that has permeated our criminal legal system forever, and so therefore we've allowed like trauma, to fester and to ripple, in certain communities without the type of support, that's needed in order to address it. The last thing that I would say about gun violence is that as the brother said, it's a disease, and we understand that violence is a public health issue, right? And gun violence is a public health issue. The thing is that we're still not doing enough in terms of investing in Pookie, Raheem, and Sabrina and them, the folks who are on the front line, because the public health frame says that those who are closest in proximity to the violence have to be equipped with the skills, the tools, and the resources to do the intervention, the prevention, and the treatment. We still haven't figured out that we have to invest in Pookie, Raheem, and Sabrina now. we still haven't figured out that we have to invest in new workforce development systems because the corporate model doesn't work, for folks who have been disenfranchised and disconnected, from mainstream, right? So we have to think at a very complex level, about the ecosystem that we create. But just in terms of focusing, right? If at the center of our ecosystem, if we're not empowering those who are closest in proximity to the violence, Pookie, Raheem, and Sabrina and them, with the skills, the tools, and the resources to do the intervention, the prevention, and the treatment, then a lot of the policies that we make, a lot of the legislation, because you can't legislate peace in the neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? You can pass a law, but the victory is not until that law becomes, a program and becomes an RFP, then it's put out, and then our community organizations apply for it and get the money, and then start providing the services directly. The policy is not the only win. The policy change is not the big win. The big win is when our organizations on the ground in neighborhoods get the resources to do the intervention, the prevention, and the treatment.
So first of all, I don't pretend to be an expert on root causes. I'll tell you what I see from my perspective, the cases that come across my desk. I 100% agree with Kellen. Yeah, 100% agree with what he said about poverty and identity. Those are things that I see in almost every case that we get. It's people in neighborhoods that don't have resources and don't have probably an optimistic view on life and are trying to make money, often through drugs. And if you're selling drugs and you have a competitor that's giving you a problem, or somebody stole your drugs, or somebody didn't pay you back, you can't go to the police and say, hey, I'm selling drugs and somebody stole my drugs. Unfortunately, that leads to people trying to solve problems themselves. And they know that their competitor has a gun and they have a gun, and that's the way that too many of these problems are solved in under-resourced neighborhoods. Identity, I think, is also part of it. Almost every New York City housing development has a crew that lives in it. Some of the people that live there identify as a certain gang or crew from that area. It's not just housing development, it's other neighborhoods too. And they have years-long disputes with other housing developments or other neighborhoods in those communities for too long. I think often the people that are part of it don't really know why they have beef with the other housing project, but they know they do it. If they see one of those guys, there's going to be a problem. They better have their guns. I do just want to talk about the clearance rate thing. From my perspective on the prosecutor side, solving murders and shootings are really hard. People don't want to be caught. They don't want to leave that evidence behind. And unfortunately, one reason it's really hard is because a lot of people don't want to come forward to that's on case one. So people are really talking about what they see, what protect. It's hard for them to
schools. And so to adapt from what you were saying, Helen, I say this all the time, which is that schools, it's not enough for schools to just be places that are free from violence. Schools also need to be places where children can thrive. And that needs to apply not just to the most privileged kids and the most well-resourced schools, but for all children. And so right now, our public school system in the U.S. serves 51 million children. And so this sort of tenet should be something that all those children experience and they unfortunately don't. I think one of the challenges, the poverty, the racism, the redlining, all of that plays out in our public school districts, right? So we see that happening. Some work that my colleagues and I'm just going to share this, some work that my colleagues and I did last year. It was a pretty straightforward paper we wrote, and we were working on this analysis. We were looking at kids ages 5 to 17, and we were trying to quantify exposure to gun violence. So in their neighborhood. So we were looking at the numbers and trying to figure out, okay, What is the prevalence of exposure to gun violence over the past few years? How has this changed since COVID? Essentially trying to understand if you're a kid living in any given neighborhood, if we looked at this by census tract, what was the likelihood that you were exposed to at least one firearm fatality in your neighborhood? So we're doing this analysis, and first of all, it's like millions of kids, millions. Like the number is so staggering when you think about the sheer number of just kids exposed to this kind of violence. Then we, of course, stratified by race, which is lots of issues with using race as a variable and all those kinds of things, but importantly, just to try to understand what are the experiences of Black children, how does that compare to the experiences of white children and other subgroups. So we have this wonderful colleague, and she's doing this analysis, and she sends us these results, and we're like, this can't be right, because what it showed in that paper, in this work, was that Black children in this country are 4.5 times more likely to experience that kind of violence in their neighborhoods compared to their white peers. 4.5. When I made this poor woman rerun that data multiple times, I'm not trying to make light of it, but I think that discrepancy took my breath away. So not only do we see children experiencing gun violence at these very high rates, we also see these very, very clear racial disparities. That number, by the way, has only gotten worse since the onset of COVID, and that, I think, speaks to the root causes here, right? The fact that we need to disrupt cycles of disenfranchisement. We need to invest in our schools. We cannot have punitive disciplinary policies that just result in kids being expelled and removed from the school system, because that's the easy short-term solution, right? To remove the quote problem child. Children are problem. That's not what happens. Children are being placed at high risk. It is our job, it is our responsibility as the adults in the room, right, to collectively attend to that. So I will echo all of this, but I think, yeah, I'll echo all of this and just say that we have a lot of work to do.
You're all saying, what I'm thinking, but it's a really exciting time to work in this world. We are evolving, and law enforcement is evolving, and prosecutors are evolving. And I get to ask this question to every young man and woman I work with in our treatment courts. Why were you carrying a gun? And almost every single time, it's the title of this panel, because I feel unsafe. And we really have to learn as prosecutors and as members of this community that people live under toxic stress in a place where this type of behavior is normalized. And they will tell me time and time again, Ms. Anlin, I know I was arrested. It's very scary to be in this situation, but I would rather have a gun on me if there is a scary, violent interaction than not have a gun on me. I would rather be arrested and go through this process. And when you talk to victims of gun violence, members of our community, we all know that when you send someone to state prison, you are creating more problems. They are losing access to their families, to their jobs, to their housing, to their communities, and they're going to come back to the same neighborhood. And a lot of people in these neighborhoods would rather these people come back to them whole, right? We talked about this morning, whole, with an identity, with a goal, with people around them, than having lost those opportunities. And so there's a real push, especially with the people sitting on this stage. Pro-social development, workforce development, getting them involved with other people. When you surround yourself with good people, it makes you want to do good things. And for us to be a little bit more understanding that it's not just good guys and bad guys, but that, when you try cases, it's the elements of identity and, what's under original law. In doing this kind of work, we're really trying to understand why someone is causing a crime. Can we manage them safely in the community? And are there programs out there to help them? And so we need more programs, and we need more funding for these programs. For a lot of the young people I work with, we need people who are willing to hire them in a job, despite their backgrounds, people who are willing to rent them apartments, despite their backgrounds, and people willing to sit down and work with them and mentor them and make them feel valuable. Because a lot of these people get caught up in places where they feel like they belong, which are not necessarily pro-social. and we need to show them new options and that they matter. And I just want to share something that actually happened yesterday. It was very fortuitous before this panel. I was in our treatment court and we had a graduation. And it was a young man who was charged with criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. He had just completed a year of programming with Rocknet. And this young man, I seen him in court many times. When he started, very withdrawn, the body language, very pulled in. At his graduation, despite actually having broken his ankle and just having surgery, this man was beaming, absolutely beaming, and so proud to tell the judge about the work that he had done this year, the training that he had done to become a credible messenger, how transformational, transformative that was for him, to not only better himself, get a job, work on the trauma and the inner issues that were going on that led him to carry a gun and feel unsafe, but now to be an example to the other people in his group and his community to show that you can make a change. And after that guy graduated in this wonderful speech, I had someone on who was struggling in his programming. And he said, I just saw that graduation, Ms. Hamlin and Judge Biden, I want to be like that guy. And it's creating more role models who have lived the experience and can say, if I can do it, you can do it too. And people like us supporting them and working together in that journey.
Thank you. I want to keep going. Kind of what are you seeing in schools? And I think too, not just addressing violence, but the trauma of violence. And you said the number of kids who are exposed to gun violence. I'm just hearing about gun violence. Where are you seeing successful models for addressing that kind of trauma and also the violence?
Okay. Wow. This is a whole panel in and of itself. But I'll give you, I think, my short version of this. So I'll tell you that right now, and very understandably, schools are being put in a position where they're trying to do what they can to respond to the anticipation of this kind of gun violence. And how could you not, right? You see the news and Nashville and Uvalde and Parkland. I mean, this punctuates our day to day. It is far, far, far too prevalent. The challenge right now is that, and this is because we're not collectively addressing the root causes in our community. So I think part of reducing school gun violence is reducing community level gun violence, reducing access to firearms, all of that. There's a whole framework for that my colleagues and I have put forth that draws on this collective body of work. But within schools, and very understandably, we are seeing schools they're investing in what we call reactive strategies. So we're arming teachers and we're investing in bulletproof backpacks. And my beautiful little 7-year-old has now gone through 6 active shooter drills in his lifetime, which just kills me because it's not doing shit, I can tell you that, to actually prevent anything. So it makes me it behooves us to look at this and say, all right, we are hardening our schools and we are investing in these strategies, many of which are very, very expensive. I'll tell you that arming teachers, there was a report that came out in 2013 that said, if we armed even one teacher in every public school in this country, it would eat up 30% of our federal education budget. We don't have enough money to ensure that our kids are not hungry, right? We're not we are not paying our teachers enough. Most schools don't even have a full-time school nurse, and we're trying to so when we look at the current reaction, it's understandable, but it's also deeply misguided in the sense that there's no evidence driving these solutions. We don't know that they work. Because it actually work that my colleagues and I are doing right now is to actually evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies in a rigorous way. And there's also, I think, a sense that these awful, horrific shootings happen. So the natural inclination is to want to implement an equally aggressive response, right? It makes total sense. No one really wants to hear we need more green space and housing and street lighting, even though all of those things work and are actually where the solution should be. It doesn't sound like it's a reaction. And that same thing plays out in school. No one wants to hear that restorative justice practices work or that reducing punitive disciplinary policies work, but they do. So this is my long way of saying there aren't that many great models right now of schools that are implementing best practices because there's very little actually informing what those best practices should look like. And many people in positions of power who are looking at our budget, I'll use New York City as an example. We spend $400 million a year in the city in our public school system under the guise of quote unquote school safety, and over half of that budget goes to police and schools. I can tell you, I will refrain with the bad language, but I can tell you that that's also not doing anything, right? So we need to work with those in charge to say, we need universal-based school violence prevention programs that focus on pro-social skill development. We need to implement restorative justice practices coupled with reductions in punitive disciplinary policies that just exclude kids, particularly kids of color, who are disproportionately expelled and suspended from their school systems. We need to stop hardening our schools, which actually perpetuate fear and increase the likelihood that kids are even bringing a firearm to school in the first place. So a lot of what we need to do is actually very counter to what people, I think, intuitively think about keeping schools safe. I'll also add that, of course, the mental health piece is so important, the connection between schools and existing community-based services. I love that you mentioned the grant piece. I'm going to just say this. Why are we making schools write grants? That is insane. We know what works. Schools don't have time to, I just came from this field trip. My kid's second grade teacher is amazing. She does not have time to be writing a proposal. What free time does this poor woman have? She doesn't, right? We're not paying her enough. Stop making us write grants. Maybe have someone like me write a grant. Okay, I can write a grant and then just give the money out. What I'm saying is there are so many barriers in place to do the most basic, service access. So that kind of thing, removing those structural pieces, it sounds so obvious when I say it, but this is how we would move these solutions forward. Because a lot of what we know we should be doing, a lot of what we could be doing that works are things that we know work. Okay, I'll stop. That was my short response. Sorry.
Akila, same question, kind of this. Where are you seeing successful strategies? I would love to hear more about your work, and also I know that you do kind of community healing and collective healing, so if you can talk more about that too.
Sure. There's a lot working in the system currently, and I want to just shout out the Biden administration. No sitting president in the history of this country has invested more in urban communities through community violence intervention work than this administration. The Safer Communities Act, $250 million investment in community, based public safety work. The White House launched an initiative in 21 called the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative. I had the fortune of being one of the 4 national TTA providers to lead the work. We worked in 16 cities. 52 organizations, community violence intervention organizations that we worked with, and provided TTA, training and technical assistance support to these agencies so that they can function, as a complementary strategy to policing. 18 months is not enough time, to create baselines and talk about impact and all that type of stuff. But if we look at the qualitative impact of our work, it was phenomenal. It gave birth to supporting several national initiatives that are happening across the country. And so I want to just zero in on a couple of initiatives that are working right next door in Newark that I would love to invite you all over to see, right? So the Newark Community Street Team, launched in 2014 by Mayor Baraka and residents of Newark, launched NCST as a comprehensive strategy to address violence in the city. 3-pronged approach: high-risk intervention, training residents as credible messengers to leverage their relationship capital in neighborhood to prevent retaliatory violence; assertive outreach, which shows up as safe passage around schools. Started out at 4 schools, now at 22 schools. Basically, intervening, making sure that our kids go to school safely and that they come home safely. Huge impact, right, in terms of reducing violence and crime. When NCST launched its work in Newark in 2014, there was 103 homicides in the city. we did a study with the Safer Newark Council and discovered that 62% of the homicides started out as interpersonal conflicts and domestic disputes. And so this three-pronged strategy, high-risk intervention, assertive outreach, and victim services, was the strategy that we utilized to address violence in the community. And we had to do a proof of concept, so we targeted the South Ward, where most of this violence was happening. So we started at 4 schools in the South Ward, now we're at 22 schools. We had such a huge impact on violence in the South Ward. I mean, I'm talking about 60, 70% reductions in homicide. We also did a study with the Department of Health and discovered that most of the conflicts was happening in and around schools, right? Things happen on campus, spill into community on Friday. Things happen in the community on the weekend, is on campus Monday morning. South Florida Children's Alliance, who is one of the key partners in the CBI ecosystem in Newark, partnered up with several community-based organizations, applied for a federal Promised Neighborhood grant and was awarded. It's $30 million over 5 years. The impact was phenomenal in terms of academic scores going up, behavioral problems decreasing as a result of this coalition. So much so that the Department of Education actually gave them a second, had awarded us a second year $30 million Promised Neighborhood grant. So just in terms of best practices, our high-risk intervention work, started out with 16 independent contractors, making $15 an hour. Today, the Newark Community Street Team is an anchor nonprofit in the South Ward. We have over 120 staff. There's now a 20-person high-risk intervention team that is connected to the police dispatch. Every time there's a shooting hit or a shooting in the city, they respond to the scene. They never cross the yellow line. They're highly trained by the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute. First 2 years of our work, 12% reductions in homicide in the city. During the pandemic, when violence was spiking all across the country, we had a 60-year low, during the pandemic. Our cops didn't shoot their revolvers, not once. We had a 12,000-person protest around George Floyd that was led by the mayor, in which we had not one arrest. Last year, we had another 60-year low. We had 50 homicides in the city, right? Now, one homicide is too many. And so I would say that NCST, as a community-based, a community violence intervention agency, is probably one of the best models in the country. And there's a lot. New York has, great infrastructure in terms of community violence intervention. Just want to lift up my brother Kay Bain with CCD, Community Capacity Development. They were one of the White House agencies that worked on civic with the White House. The president actually came to New York and went and visited some of the organizations, some of the community violence intervention organizations. Two other highly effective and promising strategies that are happening. California, some of the proudest, as I shared with you all, I'm a survivor. My oldest son was murdered 19 years ago. I co-launched an organization in California that is now the largest survivors network across the country, called Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, with Californians for Safety and Justice and the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We're the #1 criminal justice reform in the country as well. We launched Senate Bill 580, which established the trauma recovery centers, right? Because one of the things that we recognize, and we talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of mental health services, Black and brown folks do not identify as victims, and they're not going into governmental buildings to get no mental health services in many cases, right? Because of the years of experimentation on Black folks, and they just don't trust it, right? But we established this Trauma Recovery Center, which is a national model, started in California with 12. There's now 38 all across the country. We brought it to New Jersey. We got our Attorney General and Governor to move VOCA dollars, Victims of Crime Act dollars, about $6 million to fund the TRC. And NCST applied for the grant. And so we run a trauma recovery center in the heart of the South Ward, first in the history of the city. We've seen over 600 residents in the neighborhood and provided comprehensive therapeutic services to them for free. They get 16 free sessions. If those don't, if they need more, they can sign up for another 16 to provide emergency relocation support, hardship assistance, and we have probably a couple of hundred people on the waiting list now, right? HBIP, Our hospital-based violence intervention program, University Hospital NCST program is one of the best in the state. I would say over 600 clients over the past 5 years that we've served. Is important relationship between hospital-based violence intervention and the community health workers who are embedded there that consent, those the survivors' bedside, and their relationship between high-risk interventionists or credible messengers that are embedded in community-based organizations, right? There's a high threshold for arrest and prosecution. Sometimes Pookie gets shot and now he got to go right back in the same neighborhood where Raheem shot him at, right? And so it's important that you have these high-risk interventionists in the field that develop these safety plans and that can help navigate some of the relationships to prevent the retaliatory violence because law enforcement is not always able, to do it. And then the final piece is the public safety roundtable. Public safety is a very abstract idea to most people. You say public safety and people say police. We've abdicated most of our responsibility to the cops, And so community has to be re-educated about what their role is in safety. And so we launched something, 5 years ago now called the Public Safety Roundtable, with 7 folks in the basement, at the old YMCA in the South Ward. And today, we have over 150 people who attend the Public Safety Roundtable bi-weekly. And we've had major policy changes. One of the big ones, the two big ones. One, we reformed victim services in the state because there's a clause that was preventing 90% of Black folks from receiving victims' comp and victim services called contributing behavior. If Pookie was hustling and selling drugs out on the street and he got shot and killed, they would automatically disqualify his family from receiving services to bury him. And say if he or she survived, you got automatically disqualified from receiving any type of healing services or recovery services because they said that you were involved in your trauma, And so we reformed that in the state, with the Attorney General and the Governor's office. Folks who had warrants out for their arrest was automatically disqualified, from receiving services. We changed that. In addition, accessing victim services, comes through the police department and the prosecutor's office. And so one of the things that we discovered is that there was an administrative thing that was happening within our PD in which every time a detective put victim suspect on the police report and sends it to the prosecutor's office, they would automatically disqualify the person who was on the report. And so we had to work with our public safety director in chief and have an administrative change internally so that they stop putting victim suspect on the application to get people disqualified. Because one of the things that we discovered, and this was 10 years of data that was collected by the San Francisco Trauma Recovery Center, folks who get trauma support and healing and recovery support on the front end are more likely to cooperate with law enforcement on the back end. And so we were able to bring that data, to our PD, and we have a great working relationship with our PD and our prosecutor in Newark. And it took some time, it took a lot of work, but I think that it's been a really hard-won victory, and it's really centered around leadership. So I think that there are a lot of promising initiatives that are happening out there under the CBI ecosystem that needs it still needs financial support and innovation because this is a field that is still growing.
Kelly, can you tell us more about Neighbors in Action and some of the strategies that you're using? And also, if you could just help us define violence interruption and violence intervention and how you see that play out in your work.
Absolutely. So, Neighbors in Action. And our role might look different. Our role might just be like, you know what, let me say hi to this person here in the village, just to let them know that I recognize their humanity. You never know when there's a moment that they might reach out to you for help, or if a scuffle or something's happening, culturally, hey, cut that out over there. Y'all better than that. Sometimes something as simple as that could snap a person into a different type of mindset to remember that, yeah, I'm bigger than this. I have tools. Or also, I'm connected to something bigger than me. Whether it's my family, my friends, the identity. Why neighborhoods create quote unquote crews is because there's a sense of belonging. We're a very communal people. So that concept always stays there, flipping it on its head. I wanted to talk about some models really quickly, or really approaches that I think that are really important, and we've seen a lot of success. The first one is really well known, right? People problem. Whenever we create any type of positive relationship to a young person or any adult, that transforms how they see themselves, but it also creates a bridge for support, building, upliftment, right? So that individual work where we have social workers, case managers working with community members to not only address their need, but also to help them speak towards their goals, right? Goal setting is very cliche, but it's important, right? You even see sometimes people do this in suicide ideation and in those spaces. If you can get a person to invest in their future and to speak towards that, it sets a different pathway for them, something that they look forward to. And then there's the positive reinforcement. So that's what we do with programs and investments. The other part is physical space and physical environment. Placemaking and placekeeping strategies are so effective because no matter how much work we do with individuals and groups, if we're not impacting the environment that they have to navigate, it's a half measure, right? So how do we transform an environment to increase the protective factors? Placemaking and placekeeping does that. Specifically, when you involve community members in identifying quote unquote hotspots, undesirable areas where all of the things that you don't want to see in our communities happen. They identify that, they come up with what they want to use that space for, and then the people themselves get to program, operate, and steward that space. That's that's franchising the people. That's also connecting them to spaces where they can leverage their own agency to elected officials, local organizations, X, Y, and Z. More importantly, a community is an organism, right? And anything foreign to your body has an immune system to expel it. If these initiatives, if these programs, if these projects aren't coming through the people, by the people, they're going to reject them, right? So that's why placemaking, placekeeping is so important. And even when young people do this type of work, the way that they, just going off of what you mentioned about graduation, that sense of pride, again, identity. They'll tell their friends whether they like the thing or not, be like, I did that, don't mess that up. You know what I mean? Of respect. So that's important. The last part, poverty, poverty, poverty. Internships and jobs aren't enough, right? We know that any group, regardless of race, ethnicity, or whatever, you put them in those same conditions, you'll see those same outcomes. You can go through the history of New York with tons of gangs of a whole bunch of different races and ethnicities, but what happens, those things transform because the pathways for economic development were created. So I say all of that to say, job programs are great, but we need jobs. Jobs are okay, but we need careers. We need entrepreneurship. And these things need to not be tied to someone getting involved with the justice system, right? Because all that does is net widen. And then all it becomes is another layer of control where people have more stress on top of them. Where it's like, I know I should be doing this, but I have big brother over me telling me if I don't do this, you're going to go there. And we know just from learning, right? People don't learn and retain information and practices the same way when they're in a stressful space versus when they're in a space of growth. So I think those things really help. And at Neighbors in Action, we use those frameworks to do not only responding to violence, but also to create spaces for people to become credible messengers themselves or to contribute to peace in many different ways. And I think one of the things I'm the most proudest of is when we get some of our participants who have been with us for years transform their lives and then become staff members leading programs. That's part of the sustainability that that we talk about, because our goal is to work our way out of the job. The longer that we're here, meaning the longer that these issues still are pervasive.
Helen, you said, I think the definition of peace that you guys gave us is so beautiful. You said this earlier, it's not the absence of violence, but I think you said it was helping each person see a future, see opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, so I probably got that somewhere online now. So no, seriously, I believe I said something about like peace is a foundation for a person to reach their potential.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a good definition. All right, so we're getting to the intersection of gun violence and incarceration. So I would love to talk to you on it. You work in alternatives to incarceration. Where are you seeing success there? And really speaking so locally around New York City, thinking about reconciling how violent it is, the kind of net widening effect it has, not working as a violence prevention strategy. So where are you seeing kind of success in alternatives to incarceration?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I do every day. And so, the DA's office, we, the Pathways Public Safety Division assistants, are embedded within trial bureaus. So when a case comes in and is written up with a detective or a police officer, the case is arraigned, myself, the bureau chief, and the assistant handling the case, we immediately start consulting about that case and how it should best be handled, right? We're coming from two different directions. There's prosecution and there's programming and then prevention, which you're all talking about. But it's very important for us to differentiate, right? Every gun case is different, right? There are some people who carry guns for protection, some people who work late nights, who work as Uber drivers, who feel like they need it in case something happens. And there are some very small population in the city that is driving the majority of gun violence in the 5 boroughs. And those are the cases also that we have a lot of specialty bureaus that are very focused on criminal enterprises that are driving coordinated, premeditated shootings, murders, armed robberies, destroying the iron pipeline where we have straw purchasers, or people stealing guns from down south and bringing them up to Manhattan, putting undercovers into these enterprises to make sure that we can get those guns off the street, and also a dedicated unit focusing on ghost guns, where children are making these guns at home with parts that they order online. And we, unfortunately, sometimes have to prosecute those people. Unfortunately, sometimes because of sentencing guidelines, those people are incarcerated. We still want to focus on reentry when they come back to these communities and giving them opportunities, working with parole. But on my side, when that case comes in and it's a first arrest or someone early in their criminal history, we're going to look at what type of programming can we do for this person. Is bail necessary, right? Can we put this person back in the community with supports and get them started and connected now? And then enter into a plea agreement, which we have someone plead up front in felony court to a felony. They enter a plea agreement for 1 year. They're going to be coming back to court. They're going to be going to programming around gun violence prevention. They're going to be going to therapy, workforce development, pro-social activities. At Exodus, one of our partners, there's a knitting circle. And a bunch of these men sit down together and they knit. But what happens? If we have kids, a lot of us know when you want to talk to your child, you should do something else. You're building Legos, you're driving in the car. When people are sitting and knitting, they open up. And we're working to connect these people early. And if they can do this programming within a year, get connected to stable housing, and get connected with a job, at the end of the year, they graduate. And we are there every single time in court with them because it is a team. It's very rare on trial. It's a very oppositional, adversarial thing. But in these ATI parts, the defense attorney, myself, CJI that we partner with, the social workers, the judge, the court officers, the stenographers, everyone is there cheering this person on. And so my graduations like yesterday are so much more fulfilling in my career than any trial I ever got a conviction on. And so we, getting back to your question about incarceration and Rikers, that is a powder keg, and it is a toxic environment that makes it even harder for someone to survive. And so we are hoping to intervene early and to make this a crossroads where someone can, instead of this being baggage, a criminal conviction and justice involvement is something that made my life harder, give it as an opportunity, which isn't fair, as Helen said, because we are the downstream problem, right? I get involved when every other agency and community issue failed them before, and now I have to fix it. But at least you get a holistic and curated and dedicated team that's for as long as we have to, even if it's more than a year. We've worked with some people for 5 years. We're going to keep pushing because we really want you to succeed. never want to see you in my courtroom again unless you come back as a peer mentor or credible messenger.
Wow. Drew, can you tell us too about some law enforcement strategies that you're seeing working in terms of preventing gun violence and addressing gun violence?
Sure. I want to pick up on what Tanya said about prosecutors' offices are changing. Our office is focused on 3 pillars set in the DOJ's Project Safe Neighborhoods guidelines, which are prevention and intervention, 1. 2, community engagement, and that goes to the importance of having the community on your side to help build cases. And 3, targeted enforcement. And everybody up here is expert on the first 2 pillars, so I'll talk about the targeted enforcement one. But one thing I want to leave you with is, as a prosecutor, I want all of this. I would love there to be more investment in the community and other ways to solve problems that aren't violence. I would be out of a job probably, but like that would be perfectly fine with me. I really want that. I do want to also leave you with, though, that unfortunately where we are now, I think there is still a role for enforcement. While we're doing all these other things to make our communities better, we still have to be protecting the public today from people who would do shootings and murders today. So one thing I'll mention is about a year ago, we started in New York City the Gun Violence Strategic Partnership. It's a daily meeting of about 25 law enforcement entities in the city. It's the Southern District of New York, Eastern District of New York, that covers Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, all 5 borough DA's offices, the NYPD, all the federal law enforcement agencies, FBI, HSI, ATF, parole and probation, both state and federally, state and federal corrections institutions, many other entities. They all come together and they talk about, in particular, recent arrests of people who are involved in multiple shootings. So if you're involved in 2 shootings, you're on a list of people that the police department, this entity, is going to pay attention to if you're involved in another incident. That list is less than 1,000 people in a city of 8.5 million people. So it's 0.01% of people are involved in multiple shootings. That entity comes together and talks about who's going to best prosecute this case, what other information do we know about this person, what's on social media that may show what led to this shooting. And that has been an effective way to make sure we're building the best cases on those few trigger pullers that are causing the biggest problems for safety in the community.
So we did have one quick question. I'm going to just go down the line on this one. I think everything each of you has said has been a call to action. But if you can give us, I think, kind of 2 things. You can choose which one or do both. Kind of when we think about the kind of national conversation or New York conversation on public safety and violence, I think you've already completely kind of added so much more nuance and complexity to that. It's not law enforcement versus everyone else. I think there's so many kind of root causes and things that kind of make this demand holistic solutions and holistic understandings of what's happening. So, what are we missing in our conversation? What do you want to add to this conversation? And also, as people of faith, as community leaders, what is the role? What kind of how can you support you?
Has the opportunity to do one thing to help one person, right? Whether that's mentoring, tutoring, being a welcoming person of them without a person, and giving them a meal, and just giving them beer, and being willing to listen to what they're going through. Donating money, doing a project, a postcard campaign, teaching your children to be inclusive and kind to others. These are small things that you don't have to be an expert to do. And if each one of you has to use your peers to get notified of it and support this one person that helps them, that's going to make an incredible difference in their life
neighborhood and to our
I think the theme that every one of us have spoken to is that the solution to gun violence rests in a set of values of care and compassion. And I think that is so critically important to seeing people, whether they are perpetrators of gun violence or victims of or whatever, as entire individuals, that's children all the way on through adults. And I would say I think what's generally missing from the broader public discourse is kind of two things. One is that this is a solvable problem. So my husband always laughs because he's like, he'll hear me talking and he's like, this is not rocket science. We know what we can do, right? We know what data drives good evidence. We actually have a lot of information as to what works. You're hearing, right, today, like so many existing solutions that work, and we need to ensure that they are scalable, that they are sustainable. And so we need to bring that to all the places in which we are having these conversations locally with our elected officials, at our school boards, at our PTA meetings, with our teachers, so that messaging permeates, right, the constituents and the communities in which we all live and work and in which we're trying to do all of this. I think the other thing I'll just say is, and this was again clear from today's conversation, is that I think when you ask someone what is the solution to gun violence, people turn to law enforcement or law. And I think those are parts of the solution and necessary components, but there's so many other components to gun violence and its solutions that need to be talked about. So the ways in which we can also collectively shape that public discourse in reimagining, like we really have to flip that conversation on its head and kind of think out of the box in this creative way. This is, green space is gun violence prevention, right? Stable housing is gun violence prevention. Investing in our schools is gun violence prevention. And that in our conversations, it's less about the gun as this political object and this point of division, and rather these broader, and I'm not saying the gun is not, you can't have gun violence without a gun. So yeah, that is part of the problem, but that there are also these systemic factors that also need to happen. And drawing on, I think, Kellen's beautiful vision of what peace should look like, what communities should look like. I think we want to bring that to our conversation. So that's really how I would think about it, and thank you guys for having us.
Yeah,
I think that we're all in this together. And I'm so encouraged to hear today people have so many different ways of tackling this gun violence problem, and we do have to come at it from 360 degrees. It's not just one way. I think I would encourage anybody here who is working on the many ways to solve the problem. I'm just putting in the pitch for keep law enforcement in mind. They're still part of that solution. They still want to help. There are things that we can do to help. We talked about grants in our office. Our office also issues those Project Safe Neighborhood grants to gun violence interruption programs to help support them in their work. I'll also tell you that NYPD is 35,000 officers. We all know there's been situations of bad police officers, what they're supposed to be doing. On the vast majority, from my viewpoint, they're good people who are trying to do the right thing. Prosecutors and police are also people who, for all of them, almost have decided to devote their career to protecting the public and their community. And I would just encourage you to share that message with other people as you go out there, that everybody's trying to do the right thing and find the right solution.
Can I just add one thing to that? Law enforcement and prosecutors were people too, and we don't take care of our mental health. We don't like to talk about what we see at work every day. I think we experience a lot of secondary trauma working with our victims, listening to the stories of our criminal justice.
Just echo that to say that, prosecutors make the best reformers systemically. I count George Capone in LA, Lenore Anderson, who runs the Alliance for Safety and Justice, who are all, either former or current prosecutors. who do great work, internally, like within the system, in terms of making people more aware that safety is a shared strategy. Law enforcement as a single ubiquitous institution that's responsible for all safety is just impossible, right? And I think that false narrative has to be something that has to shift, right? Because he or she who controls the narrative controls the game, right? And so the narrative around safety has been controlled by law enforcement. And so I think that two things. One, I think that law enforcement plays a real strategic role in terms of what the future, in terms of reimagining like public safety looks like. Because I share, our cops have one of the hardest jobs in the world, and they have to show up working in departments that are wrought with systemic racism and implicit biases, and they don't get any type of therapeutic and support. Right? If a cop says that, hey, I'm having an emotional psychological break, you can get ready to be rubber gunned and dashed. And it threatens. And if you're a black cop or brown cop, you got one foot out the door. It threatens their ability to be able to sustain their families and themselves, and it makes it difficult for them to show up to work fully rooted in their humanity. Right? So I think that there's a lot that has to be done, but I think that only the public can really help to change, that perception of law enforcement internally, because of the cowboy nature of it and how, deeply ingrained, like kind of unions, have gotten involved with this thing, protecting folks who might harm folks, right? We see all types of challenges on that end, like in terms of law enforcement, but at the same time, you don't see us trying to get rid of whole police departments. That is not something that necessarily happens. And so here's the other thing that the second thing that I want folks to pay attention to. In this upcoming election, there's going to be a tremendous amount of conversation about community violence intervention and community-based solutions. And I want to ask you all to give deference to community violence intervention practitioners, to Pookie, Raheem, and Sabrina and them. Folks that we traditionally don't think have the solution to the problem. But if we're thinking about violence as a disease and we're looking at this through the public health frame, those are the heroes and the sheroes and the saviors in our respective community. And we know that failure is a prerequisite for success. We have government that is losing, billions of dollars all the time, and we bail them out. I mean, the Treasury Department lost not Treasury, but the Pentagon or Defense lost $1 trillion, and nobody know where the money is, right? And it's like, but you let a gang interventionist, get caught, hustling, selling some weed on the side, or make some mistake, and it's on the front page of the news, and they're talking about getting rid of the whole agency because of a mistake of one or two folks, right? And so what I want to ask folks to do is that this is a new emerging field. And I tell you, in terms of making our community safe, it's our best chance at making our urban neighborhood safe, which is putting to work the individuals who used to be on the forefront of the violence, but who have atoned for their wrongs and who are now doing the hard work of making the neighborhood safe. Because it's dangerous and ain't easy. Just like we pay cops high salaries, specialized training, the same thing that we have to do for these community violence intervention workers who are closest, to the issue. And they're going to have intelligence about what's happening in the neighborhood, that law enforcement will never have. This is why we have to give them a chance, and we have to invest in them. And we have to allow them to make several mistakes. We have to let them fail with millions of dollars, family. We got to let them fail with millions of dollars. And keep coming back to the table and keep investing in them. Just like we've done our current criminal legal system. And I'll close on this. Last year, where the collective is the first Black lead TTA provider for DOJ for their community violence intervention prevention initiative. This is 2023, family. It's ridiculous. It's something to be celebrated, but also it's ridiculous. That this is 2023 and that this is the first time that an agency that is led by Black folks who 30 years, our practitioners have all been doing this work on the front line in the field forever, secured a contract with the federal government to provide, TTA, right? And so when these bills come out, and people, and especially in New York, because there's a lot of money, through crisis management that is being invested in community violence intervention, and people be wanting to cut the money back. Tell them to double it, family. And let folks fail a little bit, so that because the failure is going to inform how we move forward, collectively. We've seen huge failures on one side, and that failure has allowed our criminal legal system, to do some things right, and so we have to make the same type of investment and give the same type of deference and space to this new emerging, public safety strategy that's going to round out and bring some real balance to safety in our respective communities.
So I just want to echo those sentiments. I think the investment in these violence interruption, prevention programs and initiatives are so important, right? Again, I want to leave everyone with this. The goal isn't to reduce or to eliminate gun violence. That's not the goal. Gun violence is a symptom. If a person has a cold, right? We don't just want to suppress the cough. We want to get rid of the virus, we want to get rid of the disease, but then find out what were the conditions that led to that. Because if we don't get back to the conditions, we're just keeping it in place. We're keeping these problems in motion, in perpetuity. And we know where these problems exist. It's segregated on purpose, right? But again, if you look at gun violence, right, as through a public health lens, we know diseases, just like bullets, don't have names. Those impacts affect all of us, right? So when you're thinking about what your contribution could be, think of it like that. What's your contribution to a person who's not feeling well? How can you make them feel better? Maybe that's a conversation. Maybe it's just acknowledging that I see you're in pain. Maybe it's donating, whether it's time, resources, or whatever it is. But just know that each and every one of us are equally responsible for the conditions that we have today, and we're responsible for that next generation, right? What they come into. Lastly, remember your power, right? Sometimes it's easy for us to feel powerless, right? Every shootings happening all the time. People are dying. I don't know if what I have to give might be received. Give it anyway, right? Because after a while, what we need to do is retrain ourselves and retrain others to see what's the most valuable thing. And again, it's humanity. It's life. And what we share between each other has the power to construct a new reality or to keep us in destructive ways. So let's be in community.
Thank you all so much. That was such a beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful on behalf of JCRC. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful for your sharing personally and professionally. And I'm really taking away with me this idea of in the face of violence, to feel empowered, to recognize the work that you're doing in the multiple strategies to create conditions of public safety and mostly for peace. So thank you so much. Grateful for your voices and thank you all so much for being here.
As we were sitting here listening to solutions, there was a mass shooting in Atlanta.
No.
More people were wounded and were dead. Unfortunately, the journey goes on. I want to thank the panel as well. But I just wanted to let everyone know that as we talk about solutions, the problem rolls on.
Oh, guys, the Q&A? No questions? Or...
Good. Yeah.
All right, thank you again so much to our panelists. We're gonna move on to our breakout sessions, if that's okay. Thank you again. that, we will have a Stop the Bleed training with 3 doctors from Weill Cornell who are sitting right here, and that will be in room 708. And last but not least, we're going to have a session on the next steps, building a movement, and that will be in room 654, which is downstairs. Please don't leave after these breakout sessions. If you can, please come back. We're going to hear from 2 last speakers, and then we will conclude our day. So let's go.
All right, so here right now, this second part is over. Now the breakout session. I'm gonna attend a breakout session right now, Operation Hood, in the room right now. I can't attend the visual, Jordan Neely, but if you can, please come out and support. This is gonna be a great breakout session. So it's not bad at all, So, so you see here, you have Rebecca Fisher. She's speaking at the last segment of the conference from 3 to 4. So this ain't gonna be bad at all, Hey, what's up? So Rebecca Fisher, they got me here to be at the Operation Hood. Operation Hood. So I'll be there for that. So I might just head down to Roy Lafayette and just show my support because it's sad, really sad, but yeah, I'm gonna head down to Roy Lafayette. It's sad that passed away, horrible, real horrible. Less food left. Hey, how's it going? Going good. It's coming out.
So I always
Got that. Here. So we'll stop the bleed here. I'll come here. Stop the bleed here. So I'm here for this different room. Stop the bleed. Don't go live. Stop right there. Great. you know.
You've been amazing, really. Thank you so much for being here.
Is this the program for WJCS?
No, this is Stop the Bleed. It's like a basic first aid for leads.
Oh, okay.
Like human body.
I'm trying to pick back up my agenda on my phone.
Uh,
How do I find back my
Q,
agenda?
yeah, I found a QR code. It's on one of the paperwork that they had over there.
But I had scanned it in already.
I don't. I had mine before, but I scanned you the QR code. Like I don't know.
I
But you,
scanned the QR.
oh, try to go back to your history. You have Android? Go back to your history on your phone.
Go back to the history of my phone.
Yeah, that's what I'll do probably.
My history.
Yeah, and then just scroll down and just look for it.
Where do I find my history?
All right, go to Google Chrome. Google Chrome.
Oh, just go to Google.
The Chrome. You gotta go to Chrome. Your internet browser.
Yeah, that's where I'm
No,
at.
not that. Do Google Chrome. Go to Google Chrome.
But this is Google.
No, Chrome. That's the search bar. It look like a little circle, like a spinning circle, like a colorful circle. Go to Google. See. All right, go back. Go to your Google. Go to the top left, and right there, the second one in the middle, and then click the sidebars, the little three dots. Look for history, and then go down from there. You gotta scroll it down, like, and just find it.
Should be at the top.
I mean, it's not, you probably can't find it. I mean, I don't know what's other.
This is April.
Yeah.
It should be right. It should be on this side.
Mhm.
It's April 24th. It's going downward. April 4th. No, it's not here. This is going back down. March 31st.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
It's not here.
yeah.
And I tried doing it again. It wouldn't click it.
Yeah, I really don't know. Yeah, so I'm here right now inside a breakout room. I'm supposed to be for Operation Hood, but all right, probably next door. So I'm here for this breakout session right here. It's called Stop the Bleed breakout session. StopTheBleed.org.
All of our sessions are a little small. I'm wondering if people are
StopTheBleed.org.
Sorry about that.
StopTheBleed.org. You know what I'm saying? So I'm here for that. God is great. So I'm here. I think I need to know about this. Everything I can read. I think I do need to read it because I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to stop the bleed after injury. The only thing I know is the band-aid, so I gotta know how to do that. I gotta know how to do this. Everything I can read. I got this on Twitter. So that.
That's great. That's great.
And you put it back to them.
Well, kind of here and there. I grew up in a little town in Northern California, but I was many years in San Diego.
This is not even taking it.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not taking it. I don't know where to scan here. The agenda.
Sierra.
The committee on Stop the Bleed. Stop.
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
started college in St. Mary's, it's kind of the deal there. And then my dad lived in San Francisco. It's a nice place. I did, yeah. What did you study? I was a chemical engineer.
Balance is on my phone. So.
Did you ever? The name doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, for sure, yeah. You know, they were a big bunch out there. So, yeah, I can't remember if I met him. Yeah, no, it was, yeah. We used to have a big seismograph in the front of the geology building where you walk by and see where all the earthquakes in the world were happening. Yeah, it's an interesting place. Yeah, well, I used to work across the hall from Linus Paul in biochemistry. You see him almost every morning. And Gelmont was there also. And then Richard Feynman taught our freshman physics. And I'm sorry, and how are you associated with this guy? What's it like? Yeah, so you.
Should we get started?
Sure, I think so.
Okay. Perfect. Looks like we got a smaller group today, but that's fine. I'm Sarah. I am one of the surgery residents over at Weill Cornell, and I'm here with Dr. Robert Winchell and Dr. Elizabeth Gordon. I don't know, have any of you done this training before?
Never. This is my first time doing this.
Training?
I always wanted to take the training.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to do that for you today. It's called Stop the Bleed, and our injury prevention team does quite a bit of this around the city. And so, yeah, it's a great course. It's fairly easy to learn, and it's useful for a wide variety of situations. Obviously, we're here talking about gun violence, and so that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind, but it's really just about stopping any sort of life-threatening bleeding. So accidents that happen at home, car crashes, falling out of a tree with like kids playing in the backyard, that sort of thing. So really widely applicable. It comes from the Committee on Trauma in the American College of Surgeons that sort of formed a collective with a lot of other stakeholders in this area, with the different groups of emergency physicians, and actually coming from the military, using a lot of evidence and training from military experience of dealing with life-threatening bleeding and what they learned from that experience and how to try and save the life of people who have been injured. So all this kind of came together to try and create this training to prevent bleeding deaths.
And in fact, the process started just after Sandy Hook, with a group of people that got together after Sandy Hook. Because if you look at what happens in a lot of those settings and what happened in the military, is a lot of people died from bleeding from injuries that actually could potentially have been saved if someone had been able to get there. Unfortunately, in places like Columbine and Sandy Hook, law enforcement wouldn't let anybody in. And so the whole idea was, how do you get bystanders, because there may not be first responders or medical people available all the time. The idea is, how do you empower the public or the people who are there to know what to do and take first steps in how to save people's lives.
Yeah.
And that, again, was, if you look at in Iraq and Afghanistan, every single military member is what they call a combat lifesaver. And they all carry a tourniquet. They all know what to do if someone next to them gets injured. And that's kind of the genesis of the project.
Yeah, basically just thinking about responding to injury in the same way that, we teach community members CPR. Like, you learn how to, lots of people learn how to do chest compressions if someone collapses, but you don't think about bleeding the same way. And so this whole program is sort of born out of the idea, let's just get this training to the most number of people, so that way, even if there's not a doctor or nurse or an EMT present, they can still do something until that help arrives and hopefully help save that person's life. Again, very casual, we're small groups, so if you have any questions, please just speak up and we'll go through it. We're gonna do this lecture piece first, and then we'll actually get to the hands-on piece with all of the dummies, and we can actually show you how to actually do these things. So when we talk about preventable injuries, bleeding really is a huge component of this, because as Dr. Winchell alluded to, a lot of injuries cause...
Let's close the doors. Thanks.
As Dr. Winchell alluded to, is a lot of injuries that cause life-threatening bleeding. If you can stop the bleeding or at least reduce it, those don't have to be fatal injuries. And so this concept of finding these life-threatening injuries, but stopping what's going to end up causing them to die before they can get to the hospital is really the goal here. And it's very widely applicable. Like I said, we think about it primarily with gun violence in this forum, but it's car crashes, it's falls, it's accidentally cutting yourself, anything that causes life-threatening bleeding. You can apply this training, and we're going to teach you how to identify those life-threatening bleeding scenarios and when this training is actually useful and important. So first piece, like I mentioned, is to identify what is life-threatening bleeding and what are the signs for when we need to, go on this next step and start applying this training we're going to give you. And then the second piece is actually one of the main things to think about, and they teach you this when you learn CPR too, is you have to think about your own safety. So you never want to intervene in a situation where you can become a second victim, because then you're one, not helping the person that you were trying to help, and two, the people now have to come try and save you as well. So that's always key in any scenario. When you're talking about potentially violent injury, that's especially important because you don't want to run in and try and save someone if there's still someone out there with a gun or with a knife that could then hurt you. So you need to balance that. There's not a great clear answer, but it is something that you need to think about. Obviously, if you're just trying to, help your loved ones who had an accident at home, it's a much different scenario. But, if you're crossing the street and someone gets hit, you don't want to run out to the street to help them. I know you need to make sure that there's not another car coming first. So your personal safety is the most important thing. And if possible, try and remove the injured person with you, so you can remove both of yourselves from that unsafe scenario. But that's really the first thing you need to think about. And then second piece is, we're just getting started, so just take a seat. The next piece of it is if you have any sort of PPE, I think that's pretty well known now after COVID, but any sort of personal protective equipment that's available to you, oftentimes they will be in kits that are in gloves that actually does have a sensitive kit, oftentimes they'll have gloves and things like that. So whatever you can do to try and keep yourself safe is always important. If you help someone and then you see that they're having a response and you do have lots of blood and you tell them, they can see what the next steps are to do. So keeping those things in mind. So ABCs of bleeding control. The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not the only person who's going to be dealing with this. You want to make sure there's other people who are on the way to come and help you. So it's not you calling 911, it's delegating to the person next to you, like, hey, you need to call 911, you need to have other people come in, so that way you're helping in the intervening time, but you're not the help the other people and the reinforcements coming to help you. That's the first piece. The second is identifying the bleeding and knowing when you need to intervene. And the third piece is compressing really good stuff you're not doing. So, like I said, alerting 911. So, keeping them is pretty common sense. Calling them or at least delegating to someone specific to call them, not just relying on everyone who knows that there's some emergency scenario that's needing someone to call you to make sure it's actually happening. Providing any additional information that's going to help the first responders get to you as quickly as possible. So be specific in the location. And then if you have them on the phone and you're put them on speakerphone, so you can help the person just listening to them, they're training in scenarios, and you can help that person if it's a stressful area or not stressful scenario. Okay, bleeding. So I think this is something that might not seem as common sense. But when do I need to do this? And what does constitute life-threatening bleeding? And that might seem like a more challenging scenario if you don't have medical experience. Like, how do I know what's life-threatening bleeding? Is it, well, it'd be obvious. And it really is if you look for just a couple of key pieces. So first thing is you want to see is continuous bleeding. So if you go straight your arm or something, you might see it immediately, but you see it start to slow down. So life-threatening bleeding is something that's not stopping. You might see it starting to pool on the person if they have clothes and they're desaturated through. So I think the large volume where you see like pulsing or like on TV shows, it's very obvious when there's huge amount of bleeding. But from a less obvious area, it can just be it's not stopping. It's continuing to know and still considered clothes, making it cool around them. If you find that put your hand on it to help provide and it keeps it, so those are all signs that this is a large volume of blood that's coming off, but it should probably be researched to stop that. one of the things that's also important to realize, and especially when talking about, a car crash or someone who's been shot, they might have multiple spots that are bleeding. And so if someone's wearing, a big sweatshirt or baggy clothes, you might not be able to see all the spots that are bleeding. And so the best of your ability, you want to try and identify all of the spaces. That way, if you have 2 spots on your leg that are shot and you're just trying to stop bleeding at one of them, but they're still bleeding out of the other spot, you're not really seeing anything there. And so it's trying to make sure that you have the best assessment of all this person's injuries and all of the spots that are bleeding as much as you can. If you're able to, if somebody's picked up scissors, cutting away their clothing on the spot that's injured, or telling them like, hey, I need to pull back your jacket so I can see your arm that's bleeding. So that way you have a good picture of what's going on at this moment, so you can really intervene. There's a couple different areas and categories of bleeding that we think about. And for stop the bleed, it's really meant to be specifically for arms and legs. When we think about how bleeding happens, we typically think about the large blood vessels in our body. And those go from our heart out to our arms and legs. And so if we have bleeding anywhere down from just below our arms, bleeding in the chest and abdomen, those are places that you really push down on. And like if you really in a deeper. So those are places that it's hard for you as a bystander to try and do something. And so it's really maybe about the calling 911 and hoping that you can get possible. But we know that arms and legs are a large portion of the injuries that we've seen, particularly if you're just thinking about injuries that are a large proportion of the injuries, and so there's a large number of people that this training actually is very applicable for. So those are the types of areas that we think about, because we can compress and really we can get access. So it's really, we'll get to this a little bit when we talk about the strategy. You want to have the ability to really break down, and so if you know that someone's not nearby, or there is someone it might be hard to really Okay, so now getting So the main thing that we do even in the hospital is just apply pressure. So you can get fancy with tourniquets, but sort of the mainstay of stopping bleeding is just applying pressure. And that can be a lot of pressure. It might be to the point where it's uncomfortable for them and they don't like it. But when you think about how much force you need to use to really improve that blood vessel and push on it and get it to stop bleeding, that's what we're trying to do here. And so it might not always be the most comfortable thing, but it is what's going to get the bleeding to stop. So first thing, applying direct pressure to the wound, and you really want to be specific to where the injury is. So you want to be right on top of that wound, and we'll show you here with the epidemic exactly what we mean by that, but you want to be right over the area of bleeding and applying direct pressure there. You do have gauze here, and if you have something, even just like a piece of clothing, or in your production coordinator talks about using a sock, even a t-shirt, whatever you have, to help just apply directly over the area of bleeding and applying that pressure. It's going to help you get a little bit of a wider surface area when you're pressing down, so that'll help. And it also is going to give you a little bit of protection from coming into contact with someone else's blood. So whatever you have, if you don't have gauze, use a t-shirt, use a sock, just enough clothing so that way you can apply that pressure. You don't ever want to use so much that you can't see what's happening underneath. Like You don't want to take a giant sweatshirt and put it over there, and if by the time you pull it off, it's soaked through in blood, and you haven't actually been stopping the bleeding. You want to be able to see what you're doing and making sure that it's actually stopping. And then if you get it to stop, just keep doing what you're doing. You don't want to mess with it. You don't want to take your hand off and see if it stops. If you're pushing and there's not more blood flowing around there, and it's not just still ongoing, you did the right thing. Just hold there until you can get help back with them and get them off to the hospital and see. I don't know if we actually see them. Okay, this is a demonstration. And we're going to go through this in a little bit, so we can definitely talk through it. But essentially, this is just mimicking a bleeding injury. You can see that she has a piece of clothing. She's applying just a little bit over it, and then she's applying pressure directly over it. So this is the sort of thing that you'll do, and most of the time, this is what's going to work. It's our primary mechanism of stopping bleeding in the hospital. We probably have to take someone to surgery if they need it.
That's like CPR on a cut.
Exactly, yeah, you're just applying pressure, you're trying to just fluid the blood vessels, get them closed, so they stop bleeding.
Cool.
The next piece, packing, is very similar idea, but essentially there's certain wounds that are bigger, and so they're not as conducive to just applying pressure directly over them. So there could be, some of those a larger surface area, so there's not just like one little spot, a larger area, or it could be something. And so we just apply pressure, you're only getting pressure on one part of the wound, so you're not actually able to stop all of it. So what we do in this scenario is we pack it. And so on these legs, you'll see there's a couple ones that are a little bit wider and deeper. And essentially, in real life scenario, you would take that t-shirt, you would take that sock, and you essentially stick it into the wound, and you try and fill it up as much as you can, and then you apply pressure over the top of it. And what that does is it distributes that pressure across that whole surface area of the wound to get it to stop. Because if you're just pushing down over the top of it, there's still lots of open space that isn't being exerted and can keep bleeding. And so you really want to get that full stop. And when you push down, it distributes that force, the whole area of bleeding.
So what's gauze made of, by the way? Because I know people get allergic to certain things.
So these, I don't know what these are made of specifically. There are certain types that are medicated, but they're.
So usually you can use any. Part of the program has a T-shirt that's printed on the back that says this T-shirt can save a life.
Yeah.
So it's just the idea that pressure is really what's going to stop bleeding. If there's a fairly big wound, sometimes packing cloth or gauze, whatever you have into that wound will help distribute that pressure better.
Cool.
And that's one where if it's gauze, it's great. But even if it's their shirt, your shirt, the fact is that infection is a secondary problem. The first thing you do is have to keep them from bleeding to death.
Cool.
They do sell some of the gauze that's treated with chemicals to make the blood clot faster, but frankly, it doesn't make much difference.
Yeah.
And so you kind of use whatever you got.
All right.
The biggest thing I think about all of this is that, you see that someone's bleeding, and a lot of the first response is to kind of take a step back, and it's realizing that, hey, you can really help with this, and that you kind of have to take a step forward instead. And that's often the hardest one to get past.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is basically demonstrating what I was saying, and this one is one of the medicated gauzes, the quick clot. It's got something on there to make it clot a little bit faster. But essentially, it's got this big, deep wound it's mimicking, and it's demonstrating how you want to try and feed it in and fill that whole space as tightly as possible. I know this is.
Yeah, it is.
You know, if the gloves aren't available, then you're kind of stuck with the choice of what's the right.
To save a life.
But again, to realize the gloves are much more protective to you as the person trying to help than they are to the person you're trying to help.
Yeah, in these scenarios, you really don't need to be too concerned about what harm you can cause. They're imminently at risk of dying from bleeding, and so anything you do is going to be helpful. You know, we've had people ask, like, am I going to, like, use the bullet to them by doing that? And the answer is, you know, the bullet is everything that it's going to already be pushing on it. It's not going to make things worse, you know. We pretty much in this section here that they are alive with an infection, which is better than no it. So you really can't do any more damage in this scenario. You're just going to be able to offer any help. And so it's really using your own personal safety and with that transport. So you really don't need to worry about potentially harming the person. Like I said, they might hurt, but you're not going to harm them. Yeah, there's not like a exact protocol. There are schools that that they have, you know, an AED in different public spaces, but it's not mandated or as pervasive as it quite needs to be at this point.
Yeah, some states, like California, just recently passed a law that made them basically in all public buildings, any place where there's a defibrillator. The Mets, and I think we're in the process of doing that. The companies have, we've been working combination of the mandate.
Okay, so like I was saying, really mostly for arms and legs, and that's purely because of what I said. Like when you're doing this and you're applying pressure, it's a lot of pressure, and you really have to be able to push down. And you can do that on arms and legs where there's, you know, bony prominence here. It's easier to push hard against the ground and get that force that you need to do that. It's much harder in places like the chest and belly where you have bones in the way that aren't going to be able to let you actually push on the blood vessels, or in the abdomen. can move on to the tourniquet. And we'll go through this one-on-one with these. I think it's a little bit easier to understand.
That's the time?
Yeah, so, and you'll put the time on here so that way when they get to the hospital, we can actually tell like, okay, this has been on for, 45 minutes, an hour. And we have a better sense of what's going on. Again, if you don't have a marker, it's fine, just put it on. But it is helpful if you can put the time on there.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a bunch of varieties. They all work in pretty similar ways. The cat tourniquet is the one I think we have here today, and it's the most common one. It tends to be a little bit cheaper. It's fairly intuitive. So we'll be showing you that one, but there are a variety. Most of them do rely on this kind of winch method with the piece that you twist, and so that's a pretty common idea. Basically, you just want to get the band on so it stays in place, and then you just turn and turn to get it to tighten. Here's just a different variety of ones. There's a lot of them. Okay, and so bleeding control in children, for those of you with kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, you can use all of these same principles on children with bleeding injuries as well. Tourniquets may or may not work depending on the size of the child. If it's a preteen teenager, you can throw a tourniquet on just the same, but if you're talking about a very small child, it just might not fit them. It's also easier in that scenario to just apply direct pressure because they're a smaller person, so there's less force that's needed to try and get that bleeding to stop. So young people, young children, direct pressure is going to be the way to go in most of these scenarios because you're going to be able to generate enough force yourself to be able to get that bleeding to stop without needing to rely on a tourniquet. Tourniquet is really in a scenario where there's a big wound or it's a big person, you just can't, with your body weight, you can't get the bleeding to stop just on your own, and you really need to rely on that. But for kids, most of the time you can use just pressure. Okay. Impaled objects, this is just sort of like common questions. Impaled objects, leave them be. If someone is stabbed with something, don't try and take it out, just leave it be, call 911. They're bleeding in other areas, apply pressure there, but in general, leave those be. Improvised tourniquets I mentioned, we generally don't recommend them because they usually don't work and you're wasting time doing that instead of just applying pressure, which does. If they've lost an arm or a leg, were in a car accident or something, you can put on a tourniquet the exact same way we talked about, and that's a very applicable area for using a tourniquet. It'll stop the bleeding very easily. If you're causing pain by pushing on them, you're probably doing it right, and you're probably generating the amount of pressure that you need to stop the bleeding, so that's okay. Just talk them through it, tell them why that you're doing it, you're trying to help them. And then, any other questions?
Yeah, how long is the tourniquet in length?
So we've got a couple here.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them are about 24 to 36 inches long.
Or around
made to go along even people with fairly large legs.
Yeah, they're quite big. So they do work for most people. And in those scenarios where like you have a bigger person, like you have someone who weightlifts or something and they get shot in the thigh, that's going to be hard for you to apply enough pressure potentially to get it to stop.
Yeah.
And so a tourniquet in that scenario might be useful. Any other questions? No? Okay. So mainstays, think about your safety first. You don't want to become a second victim and make double the work for whoever's trying to rescue you guys. So keep that in mind. Make sure that someone is calling 911 because you don't want to be out there holding pressure on someone without backup coming. Compress is really the mainstay. So when in doubt, just apply pressure. That's going to work in the vast majority of situations, and it's the most simple. It's one you can do without any special equipment, t-shirt, sock, whatever you got on you. It's really the mainstay, and it's just very basic but very useful. Tourniquets are very helpful when you need them, but again, don't rely or try and make one if you don't have one. And then really just wait for help to arrive. That's the mainstay. We're just trying to shorten the amount of time that someone has this ongoing bleeding to try and give them a chance of survival, because these injuries really are not so severe that we can't repair them. It's just that they're not going to get to us in time. And so that's what you guys are offering us, is you're giving them more time to make it to us. Okay. I think that's everything.
Yeah.
And we're going to just jump into playing with the dummies.
Hands on.
Yeah. Anything else? No. Okay. We'll split up.
Cool.
Maybe I'll just join you guys. We're going to do this stuff. You have good time. Okay.
Okay. Everybody got the strength one? Oh,
Here, I'm coming over
cool.
here.
Okay, remember the first things are,
So,
remember to look out.
pick a leg, any leg.
Sure, I'll take one.
There you go.
It's a heavy leg.
They're heavy.
Wow. How many pounds are these legs? Like 5 pounds?
Someplace where you're safe.
Okay. So, you can see there's a variety of different injuries on here. We've got some gauze here. And so the mainstay that we're going to talk about first is just pressure. So do you mind if I demonstrate?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say that this is our injury here. Okay?
Yeah.
So we've called 911, we've made sure everything is safe, we're not going to get injured by being here. We've looked at this and we see that there's blood pooling, it's continuing to bleed, it's spurting, things like that. And so we know that we need to do something. So in this scenario, I've got my gauze. I'm not going to unroll it or anything. I'm going to keep it in a little bit of a wand. It's not giant, but it's big enough. And I'm going to just put it directly over the wound. And then you want to use your body weight. Particularly me, I don't have a ton of upper body strength, so I'm going to use my weight to try and get this to stop. So I use the heel of my hand, put both of them over here, and then lean forward so that all of my body weight is going directly into it. And that might mean that you need to move around, that you get down on the ground with them, you position yourself in such a way that you're really able to put a lot of your body weight into that. And I'm doing that, I'm seeing that the blood isn't continuing to pool, it's not continuing to bleed, it's not like soaking up in between my hands, that's all signs that I'm doing what it should be. And I'm just going to do this until we get here. And that's it.
And what's the reaction of the individual? Are they screaming, yelling?
They might be. Yeah, exactly like that. Just kind of like right over the heel.
Yeah, push it.
Yeah, just constant pressure, exactly like that. So you really just want to talk through with them. If someone's just had a lot of bleeding, they might be confused. They might be unconscious. There's a variety of scenarios. Yeah, exactly. So it's really just about reassuring them, hey, I'm just trying to help, you're bleeding a lot, and we need to get it to stop.
And in the meantime, help is on the way.
Exactly.
I'll stay here with you.
Exactly. Just talking it through it. Because it does hurt. One, it's a wound, so a wound hurts, and then you're pushing on it. It's not comfortable. But that's okay, right? We're doing
Better than them bleeding.
Exactly. So this is the one that is most helpful in every scenario. It's the easiest. You can use whatever you have on you to do it. So that's kind of the skill that I want you to take away.
Is it okay to go this way, or the best way is to put your fingers?
Whatever you feel like is the most stable for you, so you can really put your weight on it. That's the main thing. However you can really get it. Yeah, exactly. You see how you're kind of leaning forward, putting so you're not trying to muscle it because you're going to get tired real quickly and not be able to do that. You want to just position it so that way you're letting your weight move there. And you can understand how I can say that it's going to be easier on like a kid or a thinner person to do this because there's less tissue, there's closer to the bone, it's easier to push down. So that's kind of the scenario where that works the best, but again, you can do it on other people. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Oh, here, sorry, I didn't mean to give your dogs.
That's fine, I know what I don't need to open it.
Here, we're gonna do the packing next, which I know is a little bit different. So let's do this one. So this, so this here is mimicking a big room. So you can see here when I write, there's a lot of space in there that could be bleeding. So it's harder to just push down over here.
Yeah.
And because you're not getting that pressure on that one point. Like here, this is just one leg stab and one puncture wound. So it's easy to put your weight on that entire area versus this. You push down and it's not really going to get that pressure everywhere you need to. So that's why you'll pack it in. And how do you do it? Essentially, you keep one end and you just sort of feed it in deep, trying to get it all the way filled. So you don't just like stuff it in there. You do it exactly how you're doing by you taking a piece and then just shoving it deep for each time.
Like this, right?
Yeah, feeding it in. So you really, yeah, there you go. Yeah, you do that. There you go, perfect. You do that until it starts to feel full and you can't get any more. And then you do the first piece, then you just apply pressure again.
And then the chest and the abdomen work we would call.
So that feel like a bone.
Okay, perfect. So now it feels full. Okay, perfect. So then you're going to take the rest of it stack it on top, and then you apply.
So they're all variants on the same theme.
Perfect, yeah.
The problem with
And then just take that wand over the top of it.
Belt or anything like those.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a great idea. It's just you need to get the something on.
Yeah, that feels tight. Like you don't feel like there's not a whole lot of like open space in there. Like you filled it up, so then you just take this, put it over the top, and then apply pressure again.
It makes your tourniquets
A little more complex, so you can understand how in certain situations you might need it.
Plug up veins,
But
but
yeah,
not plug
line
up the
pressure over
arteries.
the top is
Let it
usually the
still
way to
flow
go.
in, but it can't
It's
get
just
out.
this
You can
one,
actually make
insert your
the
hand,
veins.
you have to pack. Exactly.
So will a shirt work?
Yep, shirt, top, whatever you got.
Cool.
Especially if it's an accident on the road, most times you notice people take off the shirt and start tying.
Yeah.
I've seen that so many times.
You don't want to tie it.
Right.
Just wrap it around the shirt. Yeah, shirt. Just use the shirt, put it over the top, apply pressure directly over it. And that's going to be the thing to do rather than trying to make something because one, it's probably not going to work. And two, you wasted time doing it and you could have been just applying pressure and getting that like generally stop.
So that's always applying pressure.
So this is the skin. This is the fat.
And then once you got it as tight as you can get it,
Okay, so like a human body.
you turn this thing up and basically you turn it until
Okay.
the bleeding stops.
Let's go over the tourniquet because
If
it's
you got it on
definitely
tight enough,
a little bit more
if I tighten this up where it's supposed to be, I won't be
confusing.
able to feel my pulse.
If you haven't used it before,
Because
because
that's
we only got one because we
That's
go
why
grab one
it
more.
starts hurting pretty fast if it's been on. But that's the circumstance. And usually, the way that they would teach people to put it on, you know, again, this is the military, they say you put it on high.
So,
Far up on the leg or as far up on the arm as you can. In any case, you have to put it at least 3 or 4
here's
inches above the wound.
the full
If
tourniquet.
it's too close to the
Now,
wound, it won't compress
Like I
the
said, you want to
tissue.
have this between the wound
And
and
you have
your
to
heart.
put it over the soft
So if I
part
had a
of the
wound
heart.
here,
You can't put it
I'd
over
want
the
to have it
shoulder.
like somewhere up here. Yeah, not right over the elbow, that's
Yeah.
bony and not going to be able to push down on
So
it.
putting it here
So I want
would
to have it
be-
somewhere between
and so
here,
it has
the
to be
wound and my
between the
heart,
joints
because
at least 3 or
I
4
want to
inches
try and
above
keep
the
that
wound
blood from my
itself.
heart from getting into the wound where it's going to escape, which is
Put it on.
kind of bad. So that's kind of the idea. So if it's, you know, on your shin, you do it above there. If it's here, you go above. You just always
And
go,
above.
yeah,
But not getting the elbow.
yeah, closer to the body is what you want. So
Usually several
you can see that this
turns,
is
but
pretty
mostly
big.
it's
Don't
just
run those
a
people.
bleeding.
Yeah.
And when that's
Right,
done, this is
I'm
here.
I'm not going to tighten on you because it is part of blood flow. Like you put it over here.
If you want to, you can wrap, wherever you wrap the X.
You basically,
Again, this is what you have the luxury.
so you feed it through, like I said.
What time you
And
put
then
it on,
this
so
piece that you're trying to do,
next
you're not trying to get it
presentation.
super crazy tight here. You're just
In
trying to
someone
get it
with
over
really
the
thick
top so it
legs,
stays in place.
you know,
I'm gonna
bigger
tighten on the
people,
other one.
sometimes
It
one
doesn't
turn
show
that you
fairly.
can't get. And that's why
But,
you have
okay,
a
so let's
section
say-
that you can dry.
Okay, this is my wound here, and here's the
The
body.
two
So I'm
things that
putting
you
it
need are
over the end of the leg,
turning
sliding it up over the
The
leg.
wider it is, the better. It can
So now I'm between the wound and the
Yeah, so
body,
if this was this wide.
and I'm going to
And
just
you don't need
tie
as
this
much
up over here,
pressure,
tighten it,
but
not getting it super tight. Like you can see, like there's still plenty of space in here. I'm not trying to act like a tourniquet yet because this winch here, this is what's going to tighten it.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that this is kind of out of your way. Yeah, out of your way a little bit, and then you just start tightening.
Doesn't you have to go, it's always in the right place, it's always going
Either way, it's
Just,
gonna work.
just a
And you
couple
just
inches above, the closer they are to one another, the better. You're trying to
And
compress
twist.
these bands of tissue
twist.
without
And you can see how it's getting tighter
Uh-huh.
and tighter.
It
It
can
can be a
very
little
little
hard to
kids,
turn,
a lot
but
of
you can
times
see I'm
they're
actually
small, you can get more
working a little bit
over
here.
turning it just with your hands.
And then when you can't get it any tighter or when the bleeding stops, that's when you're gonna then lock it into one of these. And since the direction that you turn it, it's going to tell you which one it goes into which. But basically it wants to unwind this way, so I'm just gonna snap it in here so it doesn't unwind on me. Put this over the top and I'll right time. But you can see like it
Yeah.
indents.
You can see it went down.
Yeah.
You'll hear, you know,
Okay.
you might imagine industry.
Okay, let's have both of you. You wanna start on that one? I'll give you this one.
The whole kit can run $50. If you go out on the internet and look at cars, you look for alternatives, you can put them together for a lot cheaper. A well-constructed
Here's your tourniquet,
You know,
and
that
here's
meets
your
the military specifications.
and I can help listen that up a little bit.
You can find them for a lot cheaper, like everything else that often needs to cut a corner someplace.
Okay, so couple inches above our wound, right?
Necessarily work.
Yep.
And so there's quite a bit of variation.
Parking in the street.
You can see it's hard to turn, right?
Yeah.
But that tells you it's good, and you're gonna keep
Yes,
turning.
Cool. Keep on turning.
You keep turning until the bleeding stops, or you can't turn it anymore.
And you know, we should do.
But they were just
get
standing
those-
there not doing anything.
I'm gonna break this.
You really won't. So again, here, this is where you want to just make sure that's off there, so you can snap it.
Sarah, did you
Try to put this in
pen
here.
by any chance?
A pen?
Someone can write a pen.
Yeah, let me.
I no longer travel.
Just in case they don't freak out.
But the other thing is if you can sign in for.
It looks like ours.
We can make sure you get
I know.
your certificate for that session.
Tighten.
Oh, I have a pen.
That's what I did.
Yep, got it.
Fortunately, got it. I mean, if you start a new sheet.
How do you do?
Yeah, it's good.
Good?
Sir,
Yeah.
you start,
It's
I'm
a
not sure where
I
that
think
one
I'm
came
still
from.
going
It
to
would be easiest
go
for us
more.
to just.
Okay.
Let me try one more, see if it's going.
So what happens? Oh, yeah, we'll get to it.
So
It's going
this is
here.
this is basically it's whatever questions you got.
All right, what happens like this?
You mean how it's like over here?
Yeah.
So if this was the wound you were trying to do, you'd want to go up higher.
All right,
Any
cool.
questions?
If you-
Nice job.
If like let's see. Yeah, so like if this was our wound, you'd want to go up like a couple inches higher
Okay.
because you want to be close to it because you don't need to be like if the wound's here, you don't need to go all the way up here
Right.
necessarily. But you're not going to hurt anything by going up here. You're not. That's always the safest bet is to go up higher, but you don't have to be quite that high. Is the point? You
Cool.
can go
But
just 2 to 3
if you were
inches.
gonna make a mistake, higher.
Higher is better.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Higher is better,
Higher is better. 'Cause
except if the woman's, if it's here.
not right over the elbow. If the wound is here, you could go all the way up if you needed to.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to go that high, but you're not going to do anything
In the
bad.
most
by doing
simple training versions, like you were saying, the military version, they say put on as high as you can put it, as tightly as you can.
Okay, so the higher the better.
that. Yeah, higher is better.
And that, just because if you get too close, it won't work.
Yeah.
If you're farther
Far away.
away, it will. And
Yeah.
That's just, in the heat of the moment, trying to, get out the
Yeah.
tape measure and
The higher
decide
the
how far
better.
you are
Okay.
sometimes. It's easier
Exactly.
to just go higher.
Except in here.
Yeah.
You just don't want to put it over a joint.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not at all.
Okay. I think it's right at 3 o'clock. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
Personal question. Do you guys come out to the community?
Yeah, we do. We're trying to get more
Yeah.
involved in
Well,
doing.
I would love to
Excellent.
get you
There you
guys
go.
involved.
Oh,
In
yeah.
our church, but we do most of our people, because of the pandemic, have come back together. Most of them will come for you on Sunday. So you guys will be
Yeah.
We normally do 12.
Where are you?
I'm in
Yeah.
Bushwick section.
Royal town.
Yeah.
Would you give us your contact information?
Yeah. Okay. I'll take yours. But I can give you mine as well. Just
Yes.
Oh, these are heavy.
why don't I?
Thank you.
Why don't I just give you
Thank
mine
you.
and then you?
So, thank you. So that was a wrap for that. I learned a lot in that session today. So now I'm going to the session for 3 o'clock from 3 to 4 inside the center, hosted by Rebecca Fisher. So she's going to have her final speech. They do more panels here and stuff like that. Operation Hood, you got another panel, this and that. So 3 o'clock it's gonna start. My phone's gonna die. I gotta use the bathroom, by the way. My phone's gonna die. So, so my phone's gonna die. I gotta use the bathroom. So I'll see you guys later. Peace out.